Welcome to Stories from Behind the Scenes. My name's Ben, and I'm really excited to bring this interview to you today. It's with possibly the biggest name in the behind the scenes industry, being Charles de Lauzirika. He's been in the industry for about 25 years now and working for a regular collaborator with some of the biggest directors: Ridley Scott, Tony Scott, Michael Bay, Mark Webb, and a bunch of others. And he's one of those people who's really pushed the industry forward, in my opinion, as far as the type of content that we can expect, and really has challenged the norm when it comes to how much interesting stuff you can include. And it's really the sort of thing where if you're a fan of a project and you see that he's doing a documentary for it, that's pretty, you're going to get pretty much all you could want. So if you'd like to send through any questions or suggestions, head to turnsounds.com and you can head to the contact us page there, and that's where you can get in touch with us. Enjoy.
Well, it depends on the type of film it is. Like if it's a science fiction film or something that involves a lot of world building, I like to really get in deep with production design and costume design and the visual dimension of it. And I always try to approach it journalistically. So I always try to follow honest, real stories because they're not always pleasant. It's not always a cakewalk or a picnic. It's sometimes they're really, really difficult, and there are a lot of challenges, and there's differences of opinion, and sometimes a studio has a vision for the film that doesn't match the filmmaker's vision. So that stuff I find very interesting, because at the end of the day, when you have the finished film, then you get to enjoy the delivery of that film. You get to enjoy the final product, realizing what went into it to get to that point. So sometimes people, I think, get a little uncomfortable when I go into really honest creative conflicts, but I think that's some of the best stuff, because you learn where people come from. You learn why someone wanted it blue instead of red, or up instead of down, or whatever. And I think you learn a lot. And then frankly, I think you respect the final work. I think I've had people tell me that they had issues with Prometheus, but then they watch my documentary and now they see the film in a new light, where they appreciate what went into it. So that's kind of my goal always, is to give someone, like, whatever you thought of the film, now consider what went into it, and then reconsider the film. So that's what I enjoy doing with these documentaries.
And one sort of aspect that I hadn't thought of much till I read another interview you did a little while ago, was with regards to when the doco comes out, whether it's sort of coming alongside the movie, in which case you're kind of making it without knowing the reception and what that's going to be like. And you said you generally prefer to do them a few years later, once you are able to look back retrospectively what scenes were controversial, what did people like, and you can focus on those. Have you got any thoughts on, I guess, the pros and cons of the different approaches to it?
Yeah, I mean, look, with retrospective documentaries, it's definitely much, much easier to get a sense of perspective, a sense of, lessons learned, and what could you have avoided, what worked, what didn't work. I mean, those conversations are much easier had with a retrospective documentary, and it only needs to be like at least a year or two before you can actually have absorbed the reaction to the film. Yeah. But what you don't get when you do those is the freshness of memory of like, oh yeah, that just, I'm just coming off of that one. And so I remember when that thing happened, or when this problem occurred, or whatever. Right. So there's a trade-off. And that's why, like, in some cases, like, I feel like Kingdom of Heaven was a decent sweet spot in terms of it was soon enough after the film came out to have absorbed the reaction. Right. And long enough after it came out so that the director's cut was finished, and there was a sense of, maybe it went down this path when we should have gone this path. And here's the result of the other path, basically, which was the director's cut. So, and the fact that we got to go into that a bit was great, So yeah, I definitely prefer retrospective documentaries, but I also enjoy having fresh memories and access to all the footage and all the materials, because sometimes you could have a film that was well documented, but it's been so long that no one knows where a lot of that material is, or some of it was destroyed or whatever. So there's a clock that's ticking in terms of the content, in terms of the assets that you have, and in terms of the memories. But you're trying to find that kind of like balance of perspective, but also access. So there's no one perfect way to do it, but I feel like if you can just get a little bit of time, then you can at least have a little bit of perspective. And that's the best for me.
Mm. And do you feel like you're still able to get like an unbiased view a few years later, mainly from the interviews? Do people kind of change the stories a bit depending on how the movie's been received, or is it usually more or less the same?
It's case by case, person by person.
Mm.
I think a lot of times when it's been at least 5 years, people feel more comfortable having like honest reassessments of what happened, or
Mm.
their memories of things have solidified one way or the other, so they're more passionate about their memories, maybe. And in some cases, people who were sort of being a little bit more correct in their opinions, more promotional, more like studio friendly, when the film's coming out,
Yeah.
now have a bit more freedom to talk about what really happened or what their opinions really were. And it's not always
Mm.
negative. I mean, sometimes it's very positive. So it's like, it's just, yeah, I always enjoy having honesty and a sense of candor with, people's, memories. But at the same time, it's like, again, it's like, well, maybe they had a great experience, and through the passage of time, they've kind of forgotten it because it wasn't like a scar left in their brain, right?
Mm.
So, and those that did have a bad time later on, they're much more, not so much bitter, but they're very like feisty about it. They want to like, get their opinion across. So again, it's case by case. It really is. And sometimes you get lucky, like in the case of Blade Runner, I feel like that was the perfect balance of people wanting to get their memories on the record, wanting to talk about how tough it was, but also loving the fact that people had come to really appreciate the film and that it had this beautiful afterlife that, that the filmmakers and also the fans could celebrate. So yeah, again, one of those cases of, it was a tough film to make. There were a lot of, heads butting and just a lot of clashes, but the final result was this beautiful masterpiece that people loved years later.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, that definitely makes a difference when it comes to really opening it up. It all had a happy ending by the end, so it's all right to go through some of that stuff. Yeah, no, that's cool. What are some of the tropes that you generally try to avoid? Obviously, things like, I guess, marketing speak and just that kind of fluff is one of the obvious ones. Are there any other things you work hard to try and avoid?
I try to avoid snap zooms onto slates being clapped, right? Like the Entertainment Tonight shot.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need it. Sometimes you just need it because it's a way to just punch the moment. But yeah, I don't like those much. And yeah, people basically talking about how so and so is a genius and I would do anything for them, and the film is brilliant and it was a total joy to make. Anyone who's made a movie knows that it's a miracle movies even get made, let alone good ones, right? But any movie, no one sets out to make a bad movie. And you really have to put in an extraordinary amount of work into making any film, whether it's big or small. So I feel like, there's no scenario where a film was absolutely smooth sailing from beginning to end. It might feel like that. You might remember it like, oh yeah, that was a fun movie. We had a great time the whole time. But I guarantee there were moments along the way where there was doubt, uncertainty, disagreements. But ultimately, it was a good experience. So that's how you remember it. So yeah, I just try to avoid too much of the back padding. Everything was great. We had a great time. When it's not super warranted, when there's like, if it really was that great throughout, then I'm not really sure why we're making a documentary.
Right. Okay.
Because the whole point is to show what went into it, not this lovely yearbook of memories of just so.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And when it comes to the approach and the stuff that you include, the style and all that, does the studio just say, hey, do whatever you want, or do they generally control it? Obviously, I assume it changes case by case, but what's that process like a lot of the time?
Well, I mean, I was lucky. I would say like 90% of the time there were no notes. Most of the notes were legal. Like you can't have this person saying this, or you can't mention this brand, or you have to blur the Nike logo on someone's t-shirt, just
Sure.
things like that, right? Those are most of the notes that I got. I very, very rarely ever got creative notes, unless they came from the director of the film,
Right. Yeah.
or someone really high up, like a really like a power producer type. And even those were usually pretty minor. And I can't remember too many times. I mean, there's only one kind of infamous time where I was really unhappy with the notes I got. But the rest of the time, it's just you're just tweaking and adjusting and just protecting the studio from any kind of legal exposure. And there's no harm in that. I mean, again, it's like and sometimes if it's a story that I or the producer, whoever is producing the documentary feels passionate about, like this is key to the whole story, and the legal department's like, yeah, we can't go in there. So long as there's a conversation with them to explain like the history of that story, what it means, and what the odds are of the studio being sued over it. So long as you can have a meaningful discussion about it, and then both sides kind of understand where the other side's coming from, and then maybe there's a solution. There's some kind of like, you meet halfway or whatever, then at least you get a little bit of the story out, and then everyone gets a little victory out of it, But again, those are super rare occasions. I mean, for the most part, I was pretty lucky in that I didn't have too many notes over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, no, fair enough. And I'm definitely interested in the balance when it comes to telling the story of, I guess, the story of the production, the people involved and stuff like that, which sometimes is more interesting than other times, as opposed to balancing the technical side of it, like you're saying, lenses or I was watching the Alien 3 one earlier today, and I thought that was quite a good balance between the David Fincher stuff, which is obviously quite an interesting story there, but then it kind of smoothly went in and out of lighting in some different areas, some more technical stuff that was quite interesting. Is there generally like a certain approach you'd try and take, or do you just see how it all unfolds and what's the most interesting?
Well, before I answer that, which version of the Alien 3 documentary did you watch? The Blu-ray or the DVD?
There we go, Blu-ray. I got the 3D one.
Okay, the Blu-ray. Sorry, that's not the packaging we had here, so I had to double check it. Yeah, no, if you got the Blu-ray one, then you have the uncut documentary, which is great. So generally, look, there is a commonality to filmmaking, pre-production, production, post-production. So that's the very basic minimal structure that I start with, and then along the way you tackle the kind of the nuts and bolts of, here's what this department did, here's what this department head did, you kind of like go into that process. But along the way, that's where the problems pop up, right? They'll say, we built these sets for one director and that director was fired, so we had to change the sets to this other director, right? In the case of Alien 3. So that's a story that comes up where it's a problem that has to get solved and dealt with, but it comes kind of like wrapped in production design, right? So you kind of juggle it, and you try to find what's the best flow to this storytelling. And like I would never ever want to do a just a section that's just the tough stuff, like the problems and the headaches, and then just do set building or whatever. It's like you have to kind of organically integrate it so people understand what each department went through and how their process evolved and how they ended up with the final result that they did.
Yeah, interesting. No, that makes sense. Hey, and I guess I've got a few more technical questions and things for later, but at the moment where I'm at is I'm really wanting to pursue behind the scenes as a career. I think like you said, it's kind of dying in a lot of ways, but it's also potentially growing in other ways. With things like Mandalorian and a few other things, kind of trying some new formats for it that are potentially a way forward in the future. What sort of advice would you offer someone looking to get into the industry as a kind of a starting point?
Well, I've only met a few people, you being now one of them, that really wants to do behind the scenes material because they want to do behind the scenes material. Yeah. Like they're I think most behind the scenes producers that I've met or know see it as a stop along the way to something else.
Yeah.
So the few that I've met that really just want to do behind the scenes stuff, it's a special breed, and I find them to be very enthusiastic about just the process. They're like not even thinking about what's going to happen afterwards. I mean, as much as they would like to edit it together and tell a story, it's mostly just being on set and capturing, the moments.
Yeah.
And I think that's more and more the case now, where it's, at least in my experience, because I've been doing a lot of field producing, because I live in Atlanta now. I moved out of LA a few years ago, and there's a lot of work in Atlanta. There's tons of movies and TV shows happening, and I haven't done like a full documentary in a few years. It's like, because I've been doing like these little kind of like gun for hire mercenary gigs that, again, it's fun. I love being on set. I love, working with the people that I've worked with. But I kind of feel like, because the industry is not 100% sure about what to do with the final content, the final product of all this capture. I think maybe that is the first step, is just get in on the capture phase, at least, make a name doing that, and plant the flag and say, okay, I'm really good at being on set, not getting in the way, really capturing great material, earning the trust of everyone so I can get in close and get good stuff. And then try to have a conversation with whoever hires you to like say, there's all this great stuff that I don't know if you saw it, but we could do something with this. And then maybe they give you a shot, and then you cut something together and it wows them, and then they keep coming to you to come up with these out of the box ideas. I feel like that could be a way in this sort of new world that we're in of streaming and kind of like really short form content. Because again, it's like attention spans are, they're down to nothing now. So I just watched, by the way, A24 produced this making of the tragedy of Macbeth, Joel Coen's film.
Okay. Yeah.
And I saw, and the runtime is really short. It's like, I don't know, it was like 17 or 18 minutes. I can't remember what it was, how long it was, but I thought, oh, this is gonna be one of those really like slick promo pieces where there's gonna burn through it. And I have to say, it was really densely packed with informative stuff. I was really impressed by what they did, a lot with a very short running time. And I imagine that could be the new way forward, of like these really highly concentrated, very intelligently produced pieces that are just brief. They get in, they get out, they kind of try to understand what are the three selling points of this movie, and then go deep on those three, versus kind of what I've done, which is do 20 or 30 beats of the entire thing, where you feel like you were there for the whole shoot. This is more like, here's the best of stuff, but we're going to go deep, we're not going to be superficial. So I would say that I would say, look, really focus on capturing great material, and then you have to resell that material to the studio to say, okay, look, you may not have seen this, but on this one day, this amazing thing happened, and let me cut together something for you to see if you like it, or do like a sizzle reel or a rough or something. I think that's the other thing, is like, now there's this whole sense of side hustle and reselling yourself once you've even gotten the gig to do the behind the scenes. So
sure.
I think it's going to be an ongoing sort of evolution of how to stay relevant, but easy and affordable, and like all these things that make it so hard to do good work. But you have to remember who your audience is now. The audience is very different than it was even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, because now it wasn't just attention spans going away, and it wasn't just streaming. Now with COVID, it's sort of like there's a whole other whole other facet to how people intake, and if you can binge an entire series on a weekend, you would think, oh, you could watch a 3-hour documentary about Alien 3 or whatever. It's like you would think that you could do that, but I guess it really depends on, maybe that's the trick, is kind of like with season 1 of The Mandalorians, the behind the scenes of Mandalorian, the gallery series, is to create an event out of it, where it's sort of like, okay, here's the first episode, and then next week you get the second episode, so people get engaged, and they don't binge it, but they do. They get smaller chunks, but overall it's still like a 2-hour experience or more, so maybe it's more of like a TV series structure that would work better for behind the scenes moving forward.
Yeah, interesting.
I just came up with it. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but
And what are some mistakes or things that throughout your career that you've learned from, either sort of, I guess, within putting things in a documentary that you kind of look back on and go, oh, that probably could have been cut out, or just things being on set, learning, like you said about staying out of the way and things like that. Are there any things you've learned from that you could sort of share as advice for people wanting to do it in the future?
Well, it's tough because a lot of the mistakes or the errors that I've made have come out of basically running out of time. It's a lack of time. And so, like in the case of the Blade Runner documentary, there are tons of mistakes I see. Right. Most people may not see it, but I see these mistakes, and that's because we were so rushed towards the end that had I just had maybe 1 more week or 2 more weeks, we probably could have gotten all those things fixed. But I remember, spending my birthday sleeping on my editor's couch in Santa Monica as we were finishing the cut to get it done by Monday. So that was not the most ideal way to finish that particular project, given how big it was. So I would just say that I would probably try to either ask for more time ahead of things, like at the very beginning, or just balance time better. But in that case, again, it was like we were waiting on so much like outtake material and footage that had we not been able to include that in the documentary, it would have been like talking heads, right, some stills and some clips from the movie. It would have been so not what it is now. But we were waiting on that footage. So when we got the footage, it was like, just plug things in as fast as you can. There was like no rhyme or reason to it. We said cover holes, okay. So like that, like time management is probably something I would handle better now. The other thing is I wouldn't take things so personally, because I really feel like back then I took things very personally. Like I thought like, I want to make the best thing ever. Even if it's a movie I don't care about, I still want to make it the best this thing can possibly be, because out there is some fan who this is their favorite film. Sure. And this is something they're going to buy on day one, and they're going to watch it in its entirety, and then they're going to watch it again. And I just want to make it the best they can. And sometimes there are people in the mix who have different priorities, and that's fine. That's their job. That's their corner of the universe that they are in charge of. And sometimes, as you see in the making of a movie, there are clashes. In the making of the DVD and the Blu-ray, there are clashes. and I used to be really like, I don't know, I was very headstrong and stubborn about things, that now I feel like there's a smoother, more user-friendly way to get the same result, But when you're up against a really like an increasingly loud ticking clock to finish, and you're hemorrhaging money from your budget to finish, and when all these like stresses are coming down upon you, to have someone late in the game or at any point in the game say, here's an idea that completely derails everything you're doing. And then for me to kind of like say, no, that's insane, we're not doing that, and go away. Now I would say, well, okay, let's consider this. Let's talk about this. Let's try to figure out a way to make this work somehow. I mean, that'd be I feel like increasingly over the last several years, I've been more zen about those types of moments that invariably happen. And in some cases, it's like, I really have to weigh, is it really going to hurt the experience of the final product? Is it going to hurt the story that's being told? Is it going to hurt the viewer's enjoyment of it? And if it's not, then why not? Let's try out this idea, that comes way too late in the game, but fine, whatever. Sure. So yeah, I mean, I'll tell you this. I mean, I'm not going to mention the project, but I will say there was one project that I worked on that was a dream come true. It really was. And it was for a company that I've loved since I was a kid. And it was for a franchise that's, one of my favorite franchises of all time. And the more I talk, the more you'll guess what it is. So I had to work with this renowned production company and the studio that owns them. And whatever sort of perfectionism I would usually go for, I turned myself over to them, and just I allowed them to use me as they would. Like, just, I was just their action figure. No pun intended. And I enjoyed the hell out of it. I got to say, like, being sort of like letting myself let go of the ownership of it, and just kind of like working with other opinions, other ideas that may have run counter to my own instincts. It was surprisingly enjoyable. And so since then, I feel like I've embraced different opinions. I've embraced different ideas. And I remember the time my editor and I, he was furious getting all these notes like getting like 3 sets of notes every day as we were trying to finish this thing. And I was like, what does it matter? It's like, we're being paid to do this. It's like, this is
Yeah.
their thing that they have to show, like their name's going on it. Let's just do it, And so like every day we turn out like 3 new cuts of a piece. And I kind of got addicted to that, frankly. I kind of like, yeah, let's try this now. Let's make this thing, this entirely different thing. And it became sort of strangely fun for me in a way that it had never been previously. So once I kind of like got over that hurdle, I really lightened up a lot in terms of the process. And I don't know if that has negatively impacted the work that I've done, but it's made me a happier person. It's made me,
Yeah.
I think, get along with the process a bit better. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And I heard you mention that about Twin Peaks with David Lynch as well, that he sort of had his opinions about not liking talking heads and things. So I think you said you're able to do a similar process there of, okay, what do you want, rather than you coming in and saying, here's what we're going to do. Does that happen with many directors where they really have a certain approach that they want to take with it?
Most directors don't seem to bother with that level of focus with these things. I think they only care about what story is being told. Did anyone say anything that's patently false, especially in regards to them? And is there anything that's just wrong or bad about it? Otherwise, they seem to be okay with letting it go. And in the case of David Lynch, it wasn't so much the talking heads thing. It was just more of like, can it be something different? Can it be something that's not the usual thing? And like, for instance, the documentary I produced for the original series, Secrets from Another Place, that's more of a traditional documentary. And that's one of the reasons why David was not in that documentary, where we did our standalone thing with him, A Slice of Lynch. Yeah. And that was more his vibe, So with the new series for A Very Lovely Dream, for that piece, and since I got to be on set for that, it was a totally different, approach to the material, and it didn't have to be a talking head piece. It could, because I had gotten so much footage, and because I was going to focus on a very specific time in a kind of a short, under 30-minute runtime. It was easier to make it special and different and more like a short film and more kind of narrative and weird and just not the usual thing. And that was a great opportunity, and it was a really great way to sort of get me out of my comfort zone. And frankly, do something I would rather have done anyway. It's just that when you're hired to do a job, and you're basically, in that case, I was hired to cover for another documentarian, Jason S., who's David's preferred, documentarian. And he was not available for a key week in production where they were going back to all the original locations. And so I was just kind of thrown in to say, just shoot stuff for Jason later. And I had no idea what his style was going to be. I had no idea how he was going to approach his own materials. So all I could really do was just kind of conventionally capture moments, thinking that, okay, that'll be useful in some form. And when it came down to it, Jason didn't use any of my footage because it was not at all like his style. Because again, I didn't know what his style was. So therefore, it was almost like what you were talking about, or what we were talking about, the reselling of the idea of what you captured into something else. That's where that piece came up for me. It was like, they basically wanted to know, what could you do with what you shot? And I showed them some selects of the moments that I captured, which were great. And I don't think they anticipated it being as, for lack of a better term, artsy as it was. But I felt like, well, Twin Peaks is a very unique creation. And it might not be easy to copy it and do it in your own way, but I think it is easy to celebrate it and to enjoy like the weirdness of it and the beautiful, darkness of it. So that's what I tried to do with that piece. But that was a case of like, well, you have a filmmaker that definitely wants to do things differently. How do you support their vision for the show, but give something to the fans to enjoy as well? So it's like, I always feel like I'm in the middle ground of like trying to serve those two, masters, basically.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Going on to a couple of other sort of technical questions I had. One was, again, I assume this changes with every project, but with regards to looking through the dailies and including those, it's definitely something that I've taken away from your work to try and implement into mine. Is like Blade Runner and Prometheus in particular, they don't waste too much time just recycling shots from the movie that you've already seen? You're really at every opportunity, it seems like you're showing us something different, or even just a different version of a take from the dailies. And is that something you get to do on a lot of projects? And then how much time, I guess, do you put into looking through everything, looking for specific things from the dailies to use?
It's not always an easy process to access the dailies, the raw dailies from a particular film, because obviously those are very protected, especially when the film is being made, you know. But in some cases where you have a relationship with the editor and they trust you and they know you, and there's enough people in post where they can assign someone to say, hey, you know, make a bin of stuff for Charlie, and then just throw DVD type stuff in the bin, and then you get that, and then you kind of, you know, you don't get everything, but you get stuff that they think is interesting, and then you kind of, you know, weed through that to see what's good. Or in the case of older films where you do get to see everything, then it's definitely, I whatever editor I'm working with, I say, well, here's the types of things we're looking for. Like in the case of an alien movie, you'll say, okay, we want deleted scenes, we want creature design, or anything that shows strange, like kind of like mistakes or flubs, or, you know, the head coming off, or just like stuff like that. And then the editor goes through and just kind of like pulls things out that I would want. And then from that, I say, that's cool, put that there, use this over here. Mm-hmm. But it really is a collaboration with the editor to like figure out first, what's the story we're telling? And then what do we need to support that story? And then on top of that, the cherry on top is, can it be things that fans have never seen before? Can it be this sort of like lost footage now found? In the case of Blade Runner, like that was amazing because I got to go through all the dailies from Blade Runner. And, as again, being such a huge fan of that film, it was just a total joy every day to go through just tons and tons of footage. So that, again, unfortunately, we got the material very late. So in terms of Dangerous Days, we definitely just had to plug holes with stuff that seemed to work. Occasionally I lined up with the story that was being told, but sometimes it was just random cool outtakes.
Sure.
But in that one, my favorite, probably even more than Dangerous Days, my favorite part of the extras for Blade Runner were the deleted scenes, the deleted and alternate scenes, because we had like 4 or 5 proper deleted scenes that had sound and were like presentable. Then we had all those dailies that had deleted material in them, but we had no sound for them. But then we had all of the unused Deckard narration that was never used in any version of the film. So I thought, well, why don't we use that as an abridged narrative, like Deckard's unused narration? Then let's grab the unused footage and, kind of like illustrate the unused voiceover, and then we'll put in those proper deleted scenes, chronologically where they fit. And it created like this 47-minute alternate version of the movie, which I still love to watch even to this day. I just think it's such a fun, like alternate universe version of Blade Runner, with, like 90% never before seen footage when that first came out. So yeah, like it's always great. You can always get good stuff going through the dailies. It's just not always completely accessible, or doesn't exist in some cases anymore. I've had projects where I've wanted to go through the dailies, or I wanted to, find deleted scenes, and it was just too long ago, and that footage has been destroyed or lost or whatever. So again, every project, I just try to do the best I can. Like, that's kind of it, really. Like, that's the simple answer. Almost every question you would have is like, I just try to do the best I can. I look to see what's available. I look to see what's missing. I look to see what can we use to replace what's missing, and then put all that together into something that's hopefully interesting.
Yeah. Oh, solid. And how big is your team generally? Obviously, you've got editors, and then I imagine this is potentially changing now. You said you're doing more shorter form, smaller projects. Is that usually just you on set, or what does that generally look like?
So again, it varies. Like back in the old days when we were doing these huge sets, I could have like, 15, 20 people on a project. Mostly it is 1 or 2 editors. It is, you almost always, if you're on set, either I'm operating camera, which is less the case these days. It's more having a dedicated camera operator. And then when you're doing interviews, a sound person. So I would say minimum when you're on set, it's 3 people. It's myself, a camera, and then a sound person. If we're doing interviews, there might be a couple more people like to help out, like, if there's a second camera on a slider or whatever. But so yeah, I would say it's very rarely just me. Like that is like Twin Peaks, the last time that was just me on set, operating camera, doing all that. And then I still worked with my editor, Will Hook, back in LA when we got done with that. So, but that was like, I think the last Twin Peaks piece was the most sort of like one-man band version of that, like the leanest grouping of people. And then something like Blade Runner or Alien Anthology was the biggest in terms of, tons of people working on it.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. With location sound, it was something I wanted to get into. Obviously there's a lot of different approaches for it. The director and the Jedi and a few others have gone to the extent of marking up the director and some of the main crew. Have you ever considered doing something like that, or is it just the shotgun mic you have on top of the camera?
No, we've mic'd directors before, actually, and it's great when you can do that, because the bonus is you also get the actors they're talking to because they're so close. But yeah, I've done that a few times. It's not always easy, and you always have to remind the director, hey, you agreed to get mic'd today. Is that okay? And they go, oh yeah, okay. So, but yeah, no, that's great. And Director of the Jedi is a really great example of the intimacy you can get in terms of audio. But the camera is still way back on a long lens, out of their way. So they forget they're even being filmed, they're being captured. And so therefore you get really good stuff. And that's kind of what I've always hoped to do whenever we have that, that setup. In many ways, I think it's the best way to do it. Because I think if you have a camera in someone's face, they immediately become a different person. Sure. They immediately, they're like, in performer mode. And that goes for crew as well. It's like you could be dealing with the most sort of like shy, reclusive, director of photography or whatever, and then you're like this close, and suddenly they become they go quiet on you. So yeah, it all depends on who you're dealing with and what the situation is.
Yeah, makes sense. With just back to editing, what is do you have sort of a general guideline that you try and stick to with regards to, obviously, I imagine there's a lot of raw footage from the set. So what's the sort of advice you give to your editors when they're initially sorting through it, and what does that process generally look like?
Well, it begins, I never really I've only done it like a couple times. I don't even know why I did it, but I don't really like a writing credit on these documentaries, because I feel like the editor is more the writer than I am. But my contribution as a writer comes in the questions that are asked, and the questions come in a order, a very deliberate order, and that is sort of the beginning of a script, if you want to call it that, because the answers we get are in a chronological order in terms of the production sequence or the history of a film. And that gives my editor a guide as to, okay, here's the foundation that we're going to start building upon. And usually we try to find an interview or two that is really like the railroad track for all of it, the kind of the support for the narrative. And then other people get to pop in along the way to counter that story, or to clarify that story, or to add to that story. So there's always one interview on these pieces that I call the glue. I call this one person the glue, right? And usually it's someone who is very, very articulate, has a great memory,
right,
tells a good story. And so we use the glue first, and then or maybe we don't. Maybe we go the other way and we actually pull out the juiciest stories from other people, and then we see the gaps, and that's where we use the glue. We put the glue in between to have it all make sense. So again, it's always different. That's the amazing thing. That's the one really great, wonderful, and maddening part of this job, is that it's never the same. It's always different. That's the good and the bad of it. So yeah, I guess that's the most sort of direction I give to an editor I work with, is to say, that's the story. Now let's start helping that story out with maybe better versions of that particular moment from somebody else, or or we have this footage that we know we're going to use. So let's make sure that we've got someone talking about that footage. And sometimes that's on me, where I have to make sure I ask that question during an interview.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes sometimes, unfortunately, we will find footage late in the game after we conducted all the interviews, and we don't have someone to speak to that. So we have to put up text, or we'll say, test shoot or whatever it is. And hopefully people will get it, and we'll find some way to hopefully loop it into the conversation that's happening in the A roll and the interview stuff, so the B roll can support it. But yeah, it's tricky, and it doesn't always work, but we always try to do the best we can. And see, it seems I think people are pretty smart. People who watch behind the scenes documentaries are, I think, well versed enough in the process to understand if you have a couple gaps in your story, you have a couple bits of shorthand, I think they get it. I think they understand what's happening.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Do you ever do multiple interviews? Like, do you sometimes catch the director before, during, and after, or is it generally a case of, like, I imagine someone like Ridley Scott, you can probably only find the time once because he's quite a busy person, or what does that usually look like for you?
It depends. In his case, oftentimes there was an interview early on, and then an interview like kind of right after wrap, and then again deep in the post. It depends on, like, that's on a new movie, because sometimes it's like you have 2 hours or more worth of questions, and he's only got an hour of time, right? And he would literally say, can we pick this up tomorrow? And then my only question then is, can you wear the same shirt? You come back looking similar to how you look right now. So that's not that uncommon to, like, do multiple rounds of interviews, especially with someone who's really busy. It's almost better to do 45-minute bursts along the way, whenever their schedule opens up, which is not always great for the budget, and it's not always great for the schedule, but that's what you got to do to get it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it's something I'm finding really beneficial at the moment, just spreading out all the crew interviews. I'll sort of do a few, edit it together, see what gaps need to be filled, and then I can address those more in the future. Do you get to do that a lot, or do you often have to, just for scheduling's sake, do them all at once?
Usually you try to do them all at once. In the case of the Alien quadrilogy, and specifically Aliens, we had some holes in the story, and Galen Hurd was kind enough to come back in for like a really late in the day interview, so she could fill those holes. And I remember when I sat down, because it was a completely different location, she looked entirely different, and she said, why are we doing this again? And I said, well, we're not doing it again. We have gaps in the story that only you, other than Jim Cameron, who's not available, only you can really provide as like an authoritative voice. And then she's like, okay. So, we got her for like a half an hour, and she filled those holes. So if you watch the Aliens documentary, Superior Firepower, you will see Gail looking one way for 80% of her on-camera stuff, and then radically different for like the rest of it.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'll have to keep an eye out for it. Yeah. So you pretty much answered that, but usually an hour is what you do for most people. Do you get to do 2 hours usually?
Yeah, I mean, the longest interview I've ever done was 7 hours.
Gee.
And that was with Paul Salmon on Blade Runner. And that's one case where he's the glue, right? Yeah. So and he's got a lot of glue to share. So it's kind of like we went on and on up at his house, and I remember everyone was just like, oh my God, why are we still here? But he had the material, and in case anyone else didn't have the memory of something, he did. And so basically, when you watch Dangerous Days, anytime Paul comes up, it's usually because he had the gap. He filled the gap. That was somebody else. Like the shortest interviews I've done are more like in the 15-minute range or 20-minute range. And again, it's somebody who had a very specific role, and they didn't have much more to do with it than that, and their memories kind of faded. So I would say it's hour on average, but like in the case of Ridley, his interviews for Blade Runner and Alien were about 4 hours long.
Okay, yeah, that's decent.
Yeah, so it depends. It depends on the director. It depends on their schedule. It depends on how much you need them for. in some cases you get what you get and you do the best you can.
Yeah. Mm. And
Yeah.
with I guess trying to get all the details, do you go through every major scene of the movie chronologically, or is it more a matter of the especially if you were there on set going through the shoot, how it unfolded? How do you try and make sure you hit all the major beats there?
Well, you have to ask yourself, are you going to do an audio commentary as well, right? And
Uh,
so that's a different perspective from the same person, presumably, when it comes to the director or the
mm,
writer or whatever. But that it's a different experience because they're literally watching the film and they'll say, "Oh, this scene was tough" or whatever, and they'll explain why. When you're doing the documentary interview, usually I have pages of questions I have with me, but if I was there on set, it's very easy for me to say, "Hey, remember that day when that thing happened?" And then that might unlock a whole other conversation
mm,
that maybe I wasn't even privy to why that thing happened on set. And then he tells the story. So that like it's almost like I know we want to tell a story because it was an interesting event, but it might add an entirely different dimension to it because I didn't know why that thing happened. And then we
yeah.
start tracking down the footage to support that, or maybe I caught it unintentionally and we start looking for that footage. So it's a very organic thing. It's not there's like not a lot of there's thought put into it and preparation for sure, but in terms of the conversation and how it flows and how you do follow-up questions and how you think about stories that you weren't maybe planning to go into but yet now have new relevance because that's
Mm,
why that thing happened, then you start digging. So it's usually chronological, but it's not always. This is going to sound contradictory. It's not always chronological, but it's not always linear. It's kind of weird. It's like a
sure.
root of a tree. It kind of just does this until you get to the end.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. And with audio commentaries, do you? I think I've heard that you do that for at least some movies. You're in charge of actually making it happen. Is that literally just as simple as press record, sit down, watch the movie, or what
I
goes into
wish.
that?
I wish it was that simple. Yeah, commentaries are a drag. I'm not gonna lie. Or they can be. Sometimes they're
Okay,
wonderful. Like my favorite commentary experience I ever had was actually on the movie Speed, where
right,
it was
yeah,
Mark Gordon and Graham Yost, the producer and the writer of it. And I was like, well, per Writers Guild rules, you're supposed to invite the writer to do a commentary. You don't have to use it.
ah,
You don't have
yeah,
to use it, but you do have to invite them.
mm,
So when Mark and Graham showed up for Speed, I'm like, okay, well, this will be a nice little second commentary to have in addition to Jan de Bont directing commentary. And I wasn't really expecting much. I thought, okay, hit record and let's just see what happens. And those guys right out of the gate were like on fire. Like they were
yeah,
amazing. They were funny. They were brutally honest. Great stories. I mean, that is probably my favorite commentary, and it's certainly the biggest surprise I ever had.
right,
Because it was so much fun, but also so informative.
mm,
And it was when we recorded, it was like right after 9/11. And it was just something that it was just like this unexpected joy to have a
wow.
film where you have a terrorist who's threatening populace of Los Angeles or whatever. And it's really hard to go into a movie like Speed right after 9/11, but we
Yeah.
did. Their commentary was so much fun. It's like, oh, okay. It's okay to see a big movie with explosions again.
Mm.
Um, but that was a lot of fun. Sometimes commentaries are a drag, and because people forget or they don't know what to say, or the scene itself, there's really not much to say. Someone walks through a door into a room, they get a cup of coffee. It's like, ooh, the meaning of the coffee. It's like there's nothing to talk about. But
Sure.
but usually what I would do is I would just have them hit record and watch the movie with the person. And if 30 seconds go by with nothing, I'll just prompt them with a question, or I'll try to goose them
Yeah,
along.
okay.
It is. And then as that's all happening, I'm kind of just buffering in my brain. Okay, these are the things we didn't cover or we didn't get a good story on. So at the end, once they say, well, that was that, thanks for listening, then we do like a wild session where I'll say, okay, now what about this? Now what about that? And then editing later will plug the holes with the
Okay.
wild tracks. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll definitely check out the speed one as well. That sounds good. But yeah, no, it's it's interesting because 1917 was one where you had sort of director and then DOP Roger Deakins as separate interviews. And Roger Deakins really opened up. He got into every technical detail, gave away all the secrets, and then Sam Mendes was, he would say one thing and then he would try and keep the rest of it all a secret. So definitely interesting to see the comparisons. Do you ever combine different recordings of different people, or is it only ever if they're together talking?
No, I mean, it depends. Again, it depends on schedule, availability, like how much material you have on the disc. I mean, you have to decide what is the best way to present something. And then in the case of the Alien movies, you realize, okay, so we're doing a multi-session combo edit, right, of one track. So therefore, the other three movies probably get the same thing, right? So you start building that way. Sometimes it's better to have just a solo commentator. Sometimes it's better to have a group live together. Sometimes it's better to do an edit job and bring in different sessions. It's always different. I mean, like in the case of, like, my favorite version of the Aliens commentary was, Cameron and Gale and Stan Winston, the actors and everyone else, the effects guys, edited into a very thoughtful, coherent, flowing story.
Yeah.
And even though, Cameron certainly gets the lion's share of the track, as he probably should, it's also fun to have people pop in along the way to comment on, what he's just said or what the movie's offering. And that one flows beautifully. I think that track is exactly the way it should be. I've had people ask me, would they ever release the uncut Jim Cameron commentary tracks? Like, well, they might, but I guarantee it. I can't guarantee it, but I think it wouldn't be as informative and enjoyable as the full track,
Okay.
In the case of the Alien track, where we did the same sort of combo commentary, it's not as smooth in the flow because you have people with very different memories, points of view, cadence in the way they speak, understanding of the commentary process. It's an older film, and people have done, like, the people involved have done so many other movies since Alien, so it's kind of like it's just not quite as organically, kind of like the alchemy of it isn't as great. It's still informative, and I think it's still definitely worth a listen. But I think in that case, maybe the solo commentary from the DVD might be better. I don't know. I think Ridley did three passes on commentaries for the first movie, the first Alien. So maybe
Wow.
I've lost track. It's been so long. I mean, when you think about it, it's been like, it's been 12 years since the anthology Blu-ray. And it's been like 18 years since the quadrilogy DVD. That's a mature adult, 18 years. So it's kind of like, that's a long time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. One thing is that just your career outside of behind the scenes, because obviously you've mentioned that this is kind of, like you said before, a stop along the way, as opposed to this is the one thing I want to do. So what does that look like for you? You've done Crave 2012, is that right?
Yep.
Cool. And
Came out
then
in 2013. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then Love Bite recently, which I haven't seen yet because at least in Australia there's no legal way to watch it, but I'll definitely keep an eye out for that. What's that looking like at the moment, and any future projects that you can potentially tease?
So it's been really tricky since Crave because in a way it's almost easier to get your first film made than your second. Because then once you've made the first film, then people kind of like feel like, okay, we know what you are now. We know what kind of director you are. And that takes the mystery away. For like, if you come to them with a project that's very different than your first, which is what I've been doing, they think, well, that's not like your first film at all. So we don't understand what that's going to be like. And that's been a little tricky. And on top of that, my own personal ambition to make a film that's bigger than Crave also slows the process down quite a bit. And then, I have to earn a living. So then there's time spent on the behind the scenes stuff. So it's been slow going, but I've had a script for a while that I'm super excited about that I hope I can do sooner rather than later. But to that end, it's also a bit pricier, and it's in a weird budget range for an independent film. and given again the way the world is now in terms of theatrical distribution or exhibition rather, and COVID and streamers and all that stuff, my writing partner and I on that project have just finally locked in a lower budget film that will serve as a kind of almost like a, not a proof of concept. It's an entirely different story, but genre wise, it's similar. Visually, it's kind of similar, but it's totally affordable. And we hope to shoot it, best case later this year. So yeah, it's been tricky, to be honest. I'm very proud of Crave, and I'm really proud of Love Bite. Love Bite we just did for fun. Like, honestly, that was just sort of like my wife Carly, she came up with the idea originally. It came to her in a dream, and she just said, "Hey, this might be a fun thing to do." And so then she had me rewrite it, and I made it more darker, and like I made it more twisted and darker and everything. So, but yeah, it had a really nice festival run. We played all over the world except in Australia, which I thought about. But yeah, it was a fun, like, kind of like, it'd been a while since I directed a narrative, so it was kind of nice to rehabilitate a bit and be on set again. The one great sadness that came out of making Love Bite was the realization that I love directing. I love making movies, and I wish I'd been doing more of it since Crave. That I keep getting distracted by, I got to make money, I got to work, I got to earn a living, and that's important, no doubt. But I also feel like I should have carved out more time and maybe been less precious about what my second film was going to be. But the great thing is now I have, this project that Kaylin Egan, my writing partner on the previous couple of scripts, and I have, that we're really excited about, and that we think is totally affordable. And we're probably going to shoot it here in Georgia. And it's a great idea, and it's a big idea, and it's a big idea on like with a small scale. So it's very, very human, so that's good. So yeah, look, all goes well. We'll shoot that later this year, and then hopefully that'll wake people up to the bigger, this medieval horror movie that we've been trying to make, and then go from there. I mean, there's so many opportunities now with all the streamers and just so many different voices and so many different types of filmmakers that are actually getting things done. Yeah. There's almost no excuse not to do it. You just have to know enough people in the right, spots to get it going.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you see the next 10 years or so looking like? If obviously it's just a matter of seeing how things unfold, do you still plan to keep doing a bit of behind the scenes stuff? Are you wanting to just do narrative full time? What is that sort of looking like?
I mean, look, before I did behind the scenes stuff, all I wanted to do was narrative. Like that was, I went to film school for that. I was trying to do that when I was interning for Ridley and Tony Scott. So, and I got little nibbles along the way. I did some like music videos and commercials and shorts. I was doing it, but the whole notion of survival dominated my life, and,
of course.
And some people are lucky and they have a situation and they have the time and the focus and the energy to focus entirely on their art, and they don't have to deal with, day-to-day reality. I had a little bit of both. I had enough time and focus to do some creative things along the way, just not full bore, right? So now I'm in a situation where I think I can focus more on the creative. So when behind the scenes gigs come up, happy to do them. I love being on set. I love working with new people. I love traveling. I'm working on I directed some promotional short form videos for this horror film that's coming out later this year. That took me to Saudi Arabia, took me to Czech Republic. It was like, and like literally like a couple weeks before that job came up, I had no idea that was even a thing that was going to happen. And then suddenly I found myself packing my bags and traveling. So, and again, right in the middle of COVID, that was sort of like the strange adventure to have. Yeah. So, so the behind the scenes gig still provides the occasional adventure, the occasional fun, and certainly, welcome money along the way. But I'm not going to say no. But between that and doing a narrative, I'm definitely going to prefer to do the narrative, no doubt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and then one last thing I wanted to talk about, and I'll leave you to your day after this, is just the future of behind the scenes, which you touched on already a bit. Is there any are there any different formats or just completely out there ideas that you'd like to explore yourself, or any predictions of what the future might look like outside of you mentioned series before? Because obviously now with DVD kind of dying out, it's a bad thing in one sense, but it also gets rid of the disk space issue and other things, so opens up some other doors. Yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Well, look, I think it all boils down to the story of the making of a film or a TV show or whatever. It's like, is it an interesting story?
Mm.
But is there enough interest in the original movie or show that people want to see more? They want to learn more. Like, to go back to The Mandalorian, I really enjoyed season 1 of that. To be able to see some, on-set footage, to be able to hear the perspectives of like the roundtable perspectives they had with the various, people on the show, the directors. But when they did season 2 and they only had like this one episode at the beginning, I was like, oh, that sucks, because I wanted to learn how they dealt with the final, moments of that last episode. Right? And I'm sure it's okay to spoil because it's been a year or whatever. But so when they came back months later with a dedicated episode to how they brought Luke back, that's what I've been waiting for, frankly. Sure. And so that was driven not by necessarily an overall interest in behind the scenes. It's just like that was one aspect of the show that I was really curious how they did it, and the fact that they dedicated a whole episode to that, and not just the typical technical stuff that you were imagining happened, but like that Jon Favreau got into discussions of blockchain and deepfake and, and all these other things, and the ethics of doing, like a digital resurrection of sorts. That was fascinating. And like that, I would like to see more of that. So I think it's a combination of, is it an IP or a title that people actually have a passion for, that they'd be interested in it? And is there enough interesting behind the scenes content to support that love and that passion? Because I think just the making of process is done. I feel like no one really cares about that, except really fledgling filmmakers who want to learn how it's done, and that's a very tiny subset. That enthusiastically will watch any Criterion disc or will watch any Arrow or Shot Factory disc or whatever now. But I do think that if it's something like Mandalorian, where there are passionate fans, or other shows where there are passionate fans, and you can tell them, here's a glimpse of more of the world you love, and here are some stories about what went into that, I think people will show up for those. And I think that's where maybe the series structure might be better, to keep people engaged for a longer period of time and to get more of the story out that way. I think a really interesting template might be to like have an episode of a series and then the making of that episode almost like the next day or something like that. And just that throughout a season, like Peacemaker, for instance. I'm really enjoying Peacemaker. And I think it's the kind of show that's so meta in its own way. And it's so pop culture driven. It's just so like colorful that it doesn't take the mystery away to then go to a behind the scenes bit right after, like almost like an after show, because it's like going to a party. That show's like going to a party. It's not like going to a museum or going to like some play, or it's very artistically pretentious or lofty. It's a lot of fun. So let's have more fun. And I think to see, I can only imagine, but to be on that set must be a lot of fun. So let's see more of that, and then that tees us up for the next episode. So yeah, I think an episodic structure might be the way it could go next. And it might be a way that would get people interested in behind the scenes again. Because I feel like just the dry, linear, old school way of doing it might be done, unless it's an older film, unless it's a film that has an older audience that wants a more traditional story.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And why do you think some like Marvel, for example, I don't know how much you've seen of the assembled stuff on Disney Plus, but at least for me, that's it's about an hour of promotional fluff and maybe 5 minutes of actual how they made it. Why are studios still going that way in some cases? Is it a matter of just not knowing like, or what they want to focus on, or do they really just want to protect the brand and say, oh, everyone was great to work with? Do you have any insight into that?
I can only assume. I don't know firsthand. I can only assume it's the latter. It's protecting the brand, and I think that hopefully one day down the line, a more journalistic story can be told. Because look, the achievement of Marvel these last 20 years, whatever it's been, or 10 years. When I say it's been, or 12 years, whatever it's been.
Yeah.
But the achievement of those films that like Kevin Feige and the Marvel team have done is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a phenomenal, like long form documentary series that's not promotional, that's not, as you put it, fluff. I mean, I don't consider any of it fluff necessarily. I just consider it to be like an appetizer,
Right.
And I want a full meal at some point. And so I think that the entire Marvel, like certainly the Infinity War saga or whatever, the Infinity Saga, or whatever, could be reapproached with a long form documentary. Really gets in the nitty gritty of it, and again with retrospective interviews where people are now, okay, it's done. We don't have to be secretive. We don't have to worry about NDAs. We can just talk about this is what we actually had to do to make this happen. I think that would be a really great project for them to take on, and not just that, but like even like the new Star Wars movies or whatever. It's like, we've seen nice pieces like Direct to the Jedi is great. And there's been like other, behind the scenes bits from Star Wars that have been really great in the new Disney era.
Sure.
But I still feel like there needs to be an overall sort of like, I don't know, saga approach to it that doesn't have to happen now. It can happen like some years down the road when it's special. Like, by the way, the documentary for Rise of Skywalker, the Skywalker Legacy, it's like the film is the film, whatever, but that vintage behind the scenes material was absolute gold. Like, I sat there just in awe of like, the new movie, fine, whatever. Show me more of that, old footage, because that was incredible to see that,
Yeah.
So that was really great. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would hope that at some point there's interest enough at both with viewers and fans and the studio level to say, let's take a fresh look at this older material that might only be 5 or 10 years old in the future. And what can we do to, generate interest in it, and how will it support our bottom line, and how can it just get people excited about maybe product that's sort of resting at the moment, or get people excited for the next wave of something. Again, it goes back to the reselling thing, right? You have to say, you got all this footage that you can make something new with. It's going to cost some money to do that. What's going to justify that spend? And the thing would be something new, right? So let's just say down the road, they recast Iron Man, right? So, okay, so there's a new actor going to play Iron Man. Let's look at what came before to kind of like refresh the legacy of Iron Man.
Sure.
Maybe that's a whole new long form documentary on the 3 Iron Man movies and then the Avengers movies or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like you can that's a way to resell content that's already been captured, but presented in a new way that supports a new thing that generates revenue for the studio. Because ultimately you have to factor that. Like that's always going to be the bottom line. Does it make money for the studio?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and we had that was, I thought, a really good step in the right direction, was the Under the Helmet Boba Fett thing, which actually, explored the history of how the character was made, not, oh, he was raised on Kamino, he did this, And even just now, I just finished watching Being James Bond, which is sort of like you were saying, being able to take a retrospective rather than trying to squeeze it into the behind the scenes of each movie. Now we can take a big look back at Daniel Craig, how each movie changed his career and his approach to the character. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff, but definitely excited to see what the future holds. Is there any...
really quick, I forgot to say, I'm working on 2 other documentaries now. One, I can't say what it is, but one is for an older film for a legendary director that we all know and love, but it's kind of a somewhat forgotten film from his filmography, but it has the most amazing behind the scenes story I've ever heard. Like it was, I was shocked when I heard what happened on the set of this movie and after. So that is a project that we're kind of shopping around right now. My producing partner on that and I, and hopefully that'll get going because we've gotten really good response to the proposal and the pitch and everything. But there's one studio involved that we have to make sure they're happy because it's their movie. So, it's like that process going on. But like, that's going to be really cool because it's going to be a crazy deep dive into a movie people aren't really familiar with, even though there's a director and actor that everybody knows.
Sure.
So that's going to be fun. And then I'm doing my first non-film TV documentary, like a real world documentary. Cool. And that has been really exciting. We just started rolling on it like a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, great.
And so I'm really curious to see how that evolves because it's new territory for me. And that's why it's exciting, because it's not a making of, it is it's a very real world topic that's kind of fun, kind of dangerous, kind of weird, kind of political. And I'm really curious to see how that goes. But again, fun to try something new. Like that's the main thing I'm just trying to do, is keep it new, keep it fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I'll keep an eye out for those. I'm really, definitely looking forward to see that. And just seeing how you approach some different areas. That's going to be really exciting. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we call it a day?
No, I don't think so. If people have questions, they can hit me up on social media, at Lauzirika on Twitter if they want, or Instagram as you did. Whatever works.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, thanks again so much for taking the time to do this. I can't say enough how much I appreciate your work and your contribution just to the, I guess, the industry overall, that, where you see so much stuff that's either just, short EPK or long form kind of fairly boring documentaries. Your stuff has been really consistently interesting, and I guess I feel it's really pushed the genre forward as far as focusing on the actual interesting content of how movies are made. So thanks so much for that, and can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you for saying that. And one last thing, I really enjoyed your discussion with Jonathan Rinsler.
Cheers, yeah.
And he's definitely been someone I've looked up to for a while, and he and I had a really great chat. I was driving from LA to Atlanta, and I was I was basically hours upon hours driving through Texas, because like this is flat Texas for hours. Yeah. And when he was on the phone with me as I was driving, we talked for hours about Alien, because he was about to start writing his Alien book. And what I loved about Jonathan was that even though this was all material I was very, very familiar with, he found new angles into it that made it personal and emotional. And as I put it, it feels like you're in the room with these people. Like that was a perspective that he brought as a writer, So I've always really enjoyed his work. I have, many of his books, and I'm really glad you got to talk to him, while he was still with us. And one thing I learned, I don't know if this is some weird connection in terms of behind the scenes mojo or whatever, but he and I had the same birthday. We're both like August 17th is our birthday. So it's kind of weird that there's that connection. So I think we will all miss his voice as a writer and the projects he tackled, because God, he was so good at it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So definitely was sad to hear about that, but he's left a good legacy behind. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, I'll leave you to the rest of your day, but thanks so much again for doing this. And I'll keep an eye out for the future projects.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Cheers. Have a good one.
You too.